So, on many days, I think that as the parent's attorney, your primary role is to shift and transform the narrative about your client. When the client comes into court and the client first meets you and meets the judge, often the main narrative that's operative is one of omissions, mistakes, deficits, and the client, I think in particular, can feel as though that is the only narrative that is primary. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about are not only things that you can do to shift the narrative for the court and for the child welfare system, but I think also help you on some of your darker days shift the narrative about that client for yourself. So my colleague Janelle talked a little bit about the four cornerstones and these four areas where we devote a lot of advocacy and attention.
Hold on. I think Janelle talks after you.
Oh, okay.
I think so too.
Okay.
We'll forget Janelle. We'll just say our model that we use.
It's okay. I'll just. Do you want me to just start with that again? The transforming the narrative, or the? Okay. Do you want me to say again what the controlling narrative is, or do you want me to start like after that?
I don't think there are big enough pauses to edit it. So you.
Okay, so you really want me to slow down? Okay.
Not to slow down when you're talking, just.
Okay. I'll try. You know, in family court, you get like 15 seconds. So this is completely, I'm really dismantling habits here. Okay. Rolling? Okay. On many days, I think that the primary role of the parent's attorney is to transform the narrative about your client. When you first meet your client in court, typically the narrative about them, which is contained in the accusatory instrument, is one of mistakes, omissions, deficits, self-absorption, labels that would be hard for any of us to have attached to ourselves, mentally ill, inadequate, things like that. And so our job is to, at every chance we get, try to transform that narrative for both the court, the child welfare system, often for the attorney representing the children, so that our clients are able to be increasingly seen as people who may be challenged by many things, but who have strengths, who love their children, who are invested in their welfare, and who continue to bring things to the table, even though they stand in the position of the accused. The approach that I'm going to talk to you about today is one where we suggest that as the parent's attorney, you devote as much energy and zeal and creativity to four areas of practice, in addition to investigating the allegations and defending them. So these four areas are areas to attend to, in addition to what you would normally be bringing your advocacy to bear on. And the four areas are these. The first is taking advantage of every opportunity you might have outside of court to influence what happens inside of court. And depending on your jurisdiction, that usually means being very attentive to what happens at agency conferences. Sometimes they're called team decision-making conferences. Sometimes they're called family team conferences. Whatever the name, and whether formal or informal, that's the first thing to be paying attention to. What can I do to influence the out-of-court process so that I can really leverage the in-court process? And later on, you're going to hear from one of my colleagues talk about what she does to really influence that conference process. The second area that we want people to pay attention to is the placement of the child who goes into foster care of the children. So when children come into foster care, the agency makes a determination about where they will live. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to make sure that that placement not only supports your client's attachment to her children, but also supports the child, because the better the child is doing, usually the better the parent will do. The third area has to do with paying attention to services and the service plan that's developed for your client to make sure that it's not formulaic, that it has credibility for the client, that the client really influences that service plan and in a meaningful way, not just in a cursory or superficial way. And then the last area is visiting. So we're going to talk quite a bit about what you can do to influence a visiting plan for your client and their children, and make sure that the visits are as meaningful, as frequent, as long as possible, and that they're organized around activities that mimic family life. So my colleague is going to talk a little bit more about conferences and services, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about placement and visitation, but all four of them are important. So one reason to focus on these four areas is because we've seen in our experience with a very high volume practice over many years that it really has an impact on how quickly children come home, and that they come home faster, and that the four areas really impact the extent to which children re-enter care, and they re-enter care far less often. And while I think it can seem sometimes as though something like re-entry is not something that a parent's attorney is normally focused on, in terms of that larger narrative about our clients, we want to be maximizing, I think, everything we can to make sure that as a group they are seen as positively as possible. All of us struggle, I think, with how best to engage our clients. We meet them in crisis. We meet them when they're angry. They often confuse us or lump us in with the same people who took their children, or with the judge, or with other people that they're encountering. And one reason to focus on these four areas, these four cornerstones, visiting, placement, services, and out-of-court conferences, is because it's one way that you can quickly distinguish yourself from those other actors. And in terms of gaining the trust of your client and really building a partnership, you are going to quickly be seen as different. So if on the very first day that I meet the client, that person sees me in court standing next to them, really arguing forcefully for a visit to happen the very next day, or arguing forcefully and hopefully persuasively that my client's child be able to stay in her daycare setting even though she's going to be in foster care, that client begins to see me as someone who cares about the things that he or she cares about. And the other thing that's important in terms of transforming the narrative about our clients is an argument like that on the first or the second or the 10th or the 20th day of the case makes clear to a judge and a child's attorney and the caseworker that the person I'm standing next to is invested in the welfare of her children or his children, no matter what they might be accused of. So those kinds of things, I think, begin to slowly and sometimes maybe quickly and dramatically transform the narrative of who this client is standing next to me. Take a break. Okay, so far so good?
Yeah, so that's